There is a particular kind of tension that emerges when love and family stand on opposite sides of the same decision. It is not loud at first. It doesn't begin with conflict. It begins with hesitation, a pause before answering a simple question, a shift in tone when a name is mentioned, and slowly, almost invisibly, what was once a source of joy becomes a site of negotiation. At the center of this tension is not just a choice between two people or two sides. It is a deeper psychological conflict between belonging and becoming. On one hand, family represents origin, our first language of love, our earliest understanding of loyalty, the system that shaped our identity long before we had the capacity to question it. On the other hand, romantic love represents evolution. It is where we begin to author our own story, to choose rather than inherit, to define intimacy on our own terms. When these two forces align, life feels coherent. But when they clash, we are pulled into what feels like an impossible dilemma. If I choose love, do I betray my family? And if I choose my family, do I abandon myself? What makes this conflict so emotionally charged is that it is not simply about preference, it is about loyalty. And loyalty is rarely neutral. It carries weight, history, and expectation. Many of us are raised, explicitly or implicitly, to believe that family loyalty is unconditional, that it should not be questioned, that to go against it is not just disagreement, it is disobedience. So when a partner enters the picture and is not embraced by the family, the individual is placed in a double bind. To defend the relationship may feel like an act of courage, but it also triggers guilt. To comply with family expectations may restore harmony, but it often comes at the cost of inner conflict. This is the emotional tug-of-war where every choice feels like a loss. And yet, what is often overlooked in this dynamic is that the intensity of the conflict is not only about the present moment, it is also about unresolved emotional contracts from the past. Many families operate with unspoken agreements. We know what's best for you. Our approval matters. Your choices reflect on us. These beliefs are rarely articulated, but they are deeply internalized. When a relationship challenges these assumptions, it doesn't just disrupt expectations, it threatens identity. For the family, the resistance may not only be about the partner, it may be about a fear of losing influence, relevance, or connection. And for the individual, the struggle is not only about defending love, it is about redefining autonomy. This is why the conversation often escalates so quickly. It is never just about one relationship. It becomes about respect, values, tradition, and control. Each side believes they are protecting something essential. But here is where clarity becomes crucial. Not all loyalty is equal, and not all sacrifice is noble. There is a difference between honoring your family and surrendering your agency. There is a difference between listening to concerns and living under their authority. To navigate this tension requires a level of emotional maturity that goes beyond choosing sides. It requires the ability to hold complexity, to acknowledge the legitimacy of your family's emotions without allowing them to dictate your decisions. It requires the courage to ask yourself difficult questions. Am I staying silent to keep the peace, or because I genuinely agree? Am I fighting for this relationship because it is meaningful, or because it feels like rebellion? And perhaps most importantly, who am I allowed to become in this situation? Because at its core, this is not just a conflict between love and family. It is a moment of individuation, a threshold where you begin to define yourself not only in relation to where you come from, but in relation to where you are going. This does not mean dismissing family or idealizing romantic love. Both can be flawed. Both can be sources of deep fulfillment and deep pain. The task is not to declare one as right and the other as wrong. The task is to understand the role each plays in your life and to decide, consciously, not reactively, how much influence each should have. When you begin to approach the situation from this place, something shifts. The conversation becomes less about opposition and more about integration. You are no longer a child seeking approval, nor a rebel seeking validation. You become an adult making a decision. And that decision, whatever it may be, will have consequences. Some relationships may strain, some bonds may deepen. But what matters is that the choice is aligned with your values, not driven solely by fear, guilt, or pressure. Because in the end, the real question is not whether love or family wins. The real question is whether you can stand in your own life without fragmentation. And that is the reflection I leave you with. If you have to lose yourself to keep the peace, is it truly peace you are protecting? When families resist a relationship, it is easy to interpret that resistance as rejection of the partner, of the love, sometimes even of the person who has chosen it. But if we look more closely, family opposition is rarely as simple as disapproval. It is often layered, emotional, and rooted in meanings that go far beyond the relationship itself. Families do not just respond to who your partner is, they respond to what your partner represents. For some, a partner from a different background may symbolize a departure from tradition. For others, it may trigger fears about stability, security, or social standing. In many cases, the resistance is not even fully conscious. It is felt before it is understood, a discomfort that is rationalized later with reasons that sound practical. They're not right for you. This won't last. You're making a mistake. But underneath these statements, there is often something more vulnerable. There is fear. Fear of losing connection. Fear of being replaced. Fear that the values they hold dear will no longer be upheld. And sometimes, fear that the child they raised is becoming someone they no longer recognize. This is why resistance can feel so intense. It is not just about control, it is about preservation. Families are, in many ways, systems designed to maintain continuity. They pass down beliefs, behaviors, and identities from one generation to the next. When a relationship challenges that continuity, it can feel like a disruption of the entire system. And yet, from the perspective of the individual, this disruption is often necessary because growth, by its very nature, requires differentiation. It requires stepping outside of what is familiar and, at times, uncomfortable. What feels like betrayal to one side may feel like authenticity to the other. This creates a fundamental tension. Families often equate love with alignment, while individuals begin to experience love as something that can exist even in difference. Another layer of resistance comes from the way families interpret risk. Parents, in particular, tend to view relationships through the lens of protection. They ask questions like, will this person take care of you? Will you be secure? Will you be respected? And if the answer is uncertain, their instinct is to intervene. But protection can sometimes become projection. Families may project their own fears, past experiences, or unresolved disappointments onto the relationship. A parent who has experienced betrayal may be more suspicious. A family that has struggled financially may prioritize stability above all else. These concerns are not invalid, but they are not always accurate reflections of the present situation. And this is where misunderstanding begins to grow. The individual feels unseen, as if their judgment is being questioned. The family feels unheard, as if their concern is being dismissed. Both sides believe they are acting out of care, yet both experience the interaction as conflict. It is important to recognize that resistance is not always a sign that something is wrong with the relationship. But it is also not something to be ignored. It is information, not necessarily about the partner, but about the emotional landscape of the family. The question then is not simply how to overcome resistance, but how to understand it. What exactly is the family afraid of losing? Is it cultural identity? Is it influence? Is it the sense of closeness that has defined the relationship until now? When you begin to ask these questions, the conversation shifts. It becomes less about defending your partner and more about addressing the underlying fears. At the same time, understanding does not mean agreement. You can empathize with your family's concerns without adopting them as your own. You can listen without surrendering your autonomy. This distinction is essential, because without it, empathy can easily turn into compliance. There is also a responsibility on the part of the individual to examine the relationship with honesty, not defensiveness, not idealization, but clarity. Are you dismissing your family's concerns simply because they feel intrusive? Or are you genuinely confident in your choice? Sometimes resistance forces us to look more closely, to articulate why this relationship matters, to confront questions we might otherwise avoid. In this way, family opposition, while painful, can serve a purpose. It can deepen self-awareness. It can strengthen conviction. Or, in some cases, it can reveal truths that need to be acknowledged. But this only happens when the resistance is engaged with thoughtfully, not reactively. Because if you respond only with defiance, the gap widens. And if you respond only with submission, the self diminishes. The challenge is to remain present in the tension without being consumed by it. To say, in essence, I hear you, I understand where this is coming from, but I am also responsible for my own life. This is not an easy position to hold. It requires patience, emotional regulation, and a willingness to tolerate discomfort, both yours and theirs. It may not resolve the conflict immediately. In fact, it often doesn't. But it creates the conditions for a different kind of dialogue, one that is less about winning and more about understanding. And sometimes that is the only path forward. Because in the end, the goal is not to eliminate resistance entirely. The goal is to navigate it in a way that preserves both connection and integrity. So here is the question to sit with. If their resistance is rooted in fear and your choice is rooted in love, can you respond in a way that honors both without betraying either? When a relationship comes under pressure from the outside, something important is revealed. Not created, but revealed. Pressure does not invent the dynamics between two people. It exposes them. What was implicit becomes visible. What was manageable becomes magnified. And what may have once felt effortless begins to require intention. This is why external opposition, as painful as it is, can become a kind of diagnostic tool for the relationship itself. Because it asks a fundamental question: what holds the two of you together when ease is no longer available? In the early stages of love, connection often feels natural. There is attraction, curiosity, a sense of discovery. The relationship is experienced as a space of expansion. But when family disapproval enters the picture, that space contracts. Suddenly, the relationship is no longer just about the two of you. It becomes entangled with expectations, judgments, and pressures that neither of you fully control. And in that shift, the relationship must evolve. It can no longer rely solely on chemistry or affection. It must develop structure. Structure, in this context, means the ability to communicate clearly, to align on priorities, and to make decisions together under stress. It means understanding not only how you love each other, but how you handle difficulty as a unit. Because pressure has a way of amplifying differences. One partner may want to confront the family directly, while the other prefers to avoid conflict. One may seek reassurance and closeness, while the other becomes distant and overwhelmed. These differences are not inherently problematic, but under strain, they can become sources of friction. What matters is not whether differences exist, but how they are managed. Can you speak honestly without turning against each other? Can you express fear without assigning blame? Can you remain allies, even when the situation invites division? These are not small questions. They go to the core of relational resilience. Another dimension that becomes critical under pressure is trust. Not just trust in each other's feelings, but trust in each other's intentions. When families disapprove, it can create doubt, not necessarily about love, but about sustainability. Questions begin to surface. Is this worth it? How long can we keep going like this? What are we risking? In these moments, trust becomes less about certainty and more about commitment. It is not the belief that everything will work out perfectly, but the confidence that both partners are willing to engage with the difficulty rather than withdraw from it. And this is where many relationships begin to fracture, not because the love is insufficient, but because the pressure is unevenly carried. If one partner feels they are constantly defending the relationship while the other remains passive, resentment can build. If one partner minimizes the impact of the conflict while the other feels deeply affected, disconnection can grow. The imbalance itself becomes a new source of strain. So the question becomes, are both of you equally invested in navigating this challenge? Not equally expressive, not equally emotional, but equally responsible. Because a relationship under pressure requires shared ownership, it cannot survive if one person is holding the weight alone. There is also the question of boundaries, not just with the family, but within the relationship. How much influence will external voices have on your decisions? How will you protect the space between you from being defined entirely by outside opinions? Without boundaries, the relationship can become reactive, constantly adjusting to the latest conflict, the latest comment, the latest moment of tension. With boundaries, there is a sense of stability, a recognition that while the external situation may be uncertain, the internal foundation remains intact. But boundaries are not about isolation, they are about clarity. They require conversation, agreement, and sometimes difficult compromises. They ask both partners to define what is non-negotiable and what is flexible. And perhaps most importantly, pressure forces the relationship to confront its future. Not in abstract terms, but in practical ones. Are you building something that can withstand ongoing tension? Are your values aligned enough to support long-term decisions? Is this relationship expanding your life, or is it narrowing it? These questions are not meant to discourage, but to deepen awareness. Because not every relationship is meant to survive every kind of pressure. And acknowledging that is not a failure, it is a form of honesty. At the same time, some relationships become stronger precisely because of what they endure. They develop a depth of understanding, a resilience, and a sense of partnership that would not have been possible without the challenge. But that strength is not automatic. It is built through conversation, through mutual effort, through a willingness to face discomfort together rather than alone. In the end, the presence of pressure is not the defining factor. It is the response to it. Do you turn toward each other or away? Do you grow more intentional or more reactive? Do you use the tension to understand each other more deeply or to protect yourselves from it? Because love in its most meaningful form is not just about how you feel in moments of ease. It is about how you show up when ease is no longer available. And so the question is not simply whether your relationship can survive the pressure. The question is, who do you become within it, and is that someone you recognize, respect, and trust? At a certain point in this journey, after the tension has been felt, after the resistance has been examined, and after the strength of the relationship has been tested, a quieter but more decisive question begins to emerge. Not who is right or who will win, but what kind of life am I choosing to live? Because eventually, the conflict between love and family stops being theoretical. It becomes a decision. And decisions, unlike emotions, have direction. They move you somewhere. What makes this moment so difficult is that there is no version of the choice that is completely free of loss. If you choose your partner, you may risk distance, disappointment, or even rupture with your family. If you choose your family, you may carry regret, unanswered questions, or a lingering sense that you abandoned something meaningful. And if you try to avoid choosing altogether, you may find yourself suspended in a state of indecision that slowly erodes both relationships. So the goal is not to find a perfect choice. The goal is to make a conscious one. And consciousness in this context means alignment. It means that your decision reflects your values, your priorities, and your vision for your life, not just your fear of consequences. This requires a level of self-honesty that is often uncomfortable, because it asks you to look beyond immediate emotions and consider the longer arc of your life. What kind of relationships do you want to build? What role does family play in that vision? What does partnership mean to you? Not in idealized terms, but in lived reality. These are not questions with quick answers. They require reflection and sometimes distance from the noise of external opinions. Because when voices around you are loud and persistent, it becomes difficult to hear your own. And yet, your own voice is the one that has to live with the outcome. Part of choosing a path is also learning to set boundaries, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of definition. Boundaries are how you communicate where your responsibility begins and ends. They are how you say, I value your perspective, but I will make this decision. For many, this is one of the hardest shifts to make, especially in cultures or families where closeness is expressed through involvement, and involvement sometimes becomes control. Setting boundaries in these contexts can feel like rejection, even when it is not intended that way. But without boundaries, there is no real choice, only compliance or rebellion, and neither of those leads to a stable sense of self. Boundaries allow for something more nuanced. They create space for connection without surrender. They make it possible to remain in relationship with your family while still honoring your own direction. Of course, boundaries do not guarantee acceptance. Your family may still disagree, they may still express disappointment, and this is where another layer of maturity is required, the ability to tolerate that discomfort without immediately trying to fix it. Because not all tension needs to be resolved in order for a decision to be valid. Sometimes growth involves allowing others to have their reactions while you remain grounded in your choice. It means recognizing that their acceptance may come slowly or in some cases not at all, and deciding that while their approval matters, it is not the sole determinant of your life. At the same time, choosing your path does not mean disregarding the importance of family. It means redefining the relationship, moving from a dynamic of dependence to one of mutual respect, where love is not contingent on agreement but strengthened by the ability to hold difference. And if you choose your partner, that choice also carries responsibility. It means ensuring that the relationship you are prioritizing is one that truly supports your well-being, that it is not just an escape from family pressure, but a meaningful, sustainable connection in its own right. Because choosing love should expand your life, not confine it. And if you choose your family, that decision also deserves honesty. It should not come from fear or obligation alone, but from a genuine belief that this is where your values and sense of belonging are most deeply rooted. Either way, the integrity of the choice matters more than the direction of it. What often goes unspoken is that in making this decision, you are not just choosing between people, you are shaping your identity. You are deciding how you relate to authority, to intimacy, to independence. You are defining the terms of your adulthood. And that is why this moment, as painful as it may be, is also profoundly transformative. Because when you choose consciously, you step out of the role of being defined by others and into the role of defining yourself. This does not mean the path will be easy. There may be consequences, there may be moments of doubt, but there is also a different kind of clarity, a sense that your life is being lived from the inside out, rather than the outside in. And ultimately, that is what allows you to move forward without fragmentation. So as you stand at this intersection, facing a decision that feels heavy with meaning, consider this. The question is not which choice will keep everyone comfortable. The question is which choice allows you to live with coherence, with integrity, and with a sense of authorship over your own life. Because in the end, the life you build will not be measured by how well you avoided conflict, but by how honestly you chose your path. And the reflection I leave you with is this: if you do not choose your life deliberately, someone else will choose it for you.